Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Retro Pop Planet and welcome to the exterior of what used to be the Washington Coliseum in Washington, DC. And this is where the Beatles performed their very first show in the US on February 11th, 1964. But the story doesn't begin here. You've probably noticed recently that Beatlemania is once again surfacing, and for very good reason. This year marks the 60th year since the Fab Four first arrived in the United States. On February 7th, 1964, the Beatles departed Britain, bound for the US on a Pan Am Boeing 707 nicknamed the Jet Clipper Defiance. They landed at New York's JFK Airport at 1:20 p.m. and were instantly mobbed by 4,000 fans and 200 members of the press. The Beatles were already well known amongst younger fans prior to their arrival. Their record label dropped a few strategically timed albums in January, and when their wheels touched down in America, they had already scored their first #1 single here in the US with I Want to Hold Your Hand. These veteran touring musicians from Liverpool were on the cusp of becoming the most famous foursome on the planet. While in New York City, the Beatles stayed at the luxurious Plaza Hotel at the corner of 5th Avenue and Central Park South. Each of the four members were given their own room on the 17th floor. John had the presidential suite, Paul had a deluxe suite, George had a standard room, and Ringo was given a single. All had views overlooking Central Park. There wasn't much time for rest and relaxation because their schedule was insane. Booked solid with radio interviews, press junkets, and band rehearsals, the boys found time to take in a little sightseeing in Central Park. George had come down with a sore throat, so stayed back at the Plaza. But this was a business trip. Here we are outside of the Ed Sullivan Theater at 1697 Broadway in Manhattan. On February 9th, the Beatles made their first live US television appearance here in front of an audience of 73 million people on the Ed Sullivan Show. The Beatles were then scheduled to fly down to Washington, D.C. for their opening concert on the tour, but an East Coast snowstorm had impacted air travel and all flights were canceled. Early on the morning of the 11th, they took a train down to Union Station. Dubbed the King George, the rail car was full of press and other assorted entourage. The lads were jovial and larking about with the press, as seen in video and several of the documentaries that have been made about this trip. Upon arrival to the station, they were again overwhelmed by the number of fans there to greet them. Some estimates place it as high as 2,000 people. But when my train arrived, there was no one to greet me. The video from their arrival actually looks pretty scary, as many fans broke the barricade and surrounded the lads. This is where they would have come into the station, a couple of tracks over from where my commuter train arrived. Welcome to historic Union Station in Washington, D.C. They would have been whisked out the doors here in a waiting limo, and supposedly it was an absolute mob scene, as you can imagine. They were driven a few short blocks over in front of the US Capitol building for more publicity photos. I found pictures in a book from all four sides, and the best I can tell, they were standing right about here. It's really hard to line up because some of the roads have been closed
and the number of trees have obviously changed. It's either here on the mall or along Jefferson Drive. On the way to their hotel, they stopped at the old WWDC studios at K Street and Connecticut Avenue to conduct a radio interview. This photo was taken sometime in the 1940s. Many years later, the radio station would change its call sign again to WWDC FM Washington, or DC 101 as it's commonly known now, DC's alternative rock station. It was then off to their hotel for a bit of downtime before the show.
I finally found parking about a quarter of a mile away from the hotel. And as you can see, it's a pretty Tony area of the city. And we're actually up near the Woodley Park Zoo, the National Zoo. Pass right by the hotel driving here, so I know where I'm going, and we're just gonna walk there now. I mentioned previously, we are clear across town from that concert venue, but this was an elite hotel. A number of different famous people have stayed here, and I even read that shortly after the Beatles were here, the Rolling Stones checked in. Hotel back then was just called the Shoreham Hotel. It's since been renamed the Omni Hotel. This is where JFK and Jackie Onassis used to stay. I think there was called the Blue Room. This is where Bill Clinton played on stage during his inauguration ball. Remember the saxophone? Read a number of conflicting accounts. Everyone knew the Beatles were here. This was not a secret. And a number of the entrances were blocked off. They tried to clear out as much of the hotel as possible, but a number of conflicting reports state that it was the entire 7th floor, but then I've read another report that said they rented out the entire 6th floor. So I'm not sure exactly which section. As you can probably tell, this is a very large property, so I'm not sure, if that meant it was the entire building or just a certain section on that floor. But they had pretty much the lay of the land. At one point I read that they basically cut out the power just to get a family out of here that was so adamant on seeing the Beatles they did not want to leave. So the hotel cut power. I don't know how true that is. And I'm told there's one piece of memorabilia inside, which is amazing. So come on, let's go inside and see if we can find it.
Walking in, I wasn't sure how much access I was going to have in the hotel. One of the bellhops kept giving me weird looks as I was walking around because it was pretty obvious that I wasn't part of the Young Professionals Conference that was taking place. As a result, I didn't take any video inside, only photos. The lobby, however, was beautiful. And after walking around for a few minutes, I found what I was looking for.
Okay, that was so cool. It took me a little bit to find it. It's actually right across from the ballroom, but that is the original set list handwritten on stationery from the hotel by John Lennon himself. Super awesome that still exists. There's some sort of conference going on here, so I didn't take a lot of video inside. I just took photos. People were looking at me kind of weird. And then I snapped a quick photo of the ballroom, which the Beatles didn't really have anything to do with because they didn't play here. But still, this was definitely worth the trip. And so from here, they went off and played that very famous concert.
Just one metro stop away from Union Station is the Noma Gallaudet University stop on the Red Line. We drove here on this particular day, but it's a brisk walk under the train trestle and you're there. An REI store, the site of the former Washington Coliseum. The fact that this building is still standing is nothing short of a miracle. It was a boxing venue when the Beatles played here in '64, but it's also played host to hockey and basketball games. In the 1980s, this dilapidated structure played host to many bands popular in the DC hardcore movement. This was basically home away from home for Fugazi. It was serving as a parking facility on the verge of demolition before it was saved. Now it houses the REI Co-op.
Is that real?
Yeah.
Whoa, you guys, they still have some of the original seats in here. That is awesome. Actually looks like they have part of the floor. I don't know if this whole wall is made up of the original wooden floor, but it looks like it. And I had to come here behind some of the boxes, but this is a whole write-up about the Washington Sports Arena.
Also on the bill that night were the Chiffons and Tommy Roe. The snowstorm the day before caused the Chiffons to miss the gig, and instead the opening acts were Jay and the Americans, the Righteous Brothers, and Tommy Roe. That's quite the lineup. The Beatles took the stage at 8:31 p.m. and played the set list I just showed you. Their catalog up to that point primarily consisted of popular songs from black artists, as well as a few of their hits that were already topping the charts. Up until the past year, they were primarily a touring band with little to no studio time. Their relationship with manager Brian Epstein would skyrocket them past the point of being able to perform safely on stage. But this was their prime. And if you're a Beatles fan, I'm sure you have already seen video from the concert or own the album. There's plenty of sites here on YouTube, so I recommend you go watch the set. It's under 30 minutes in total. It's raucous and fun. I don't think the audio is as terrible as most critics seem to think. Every so often, the band does a 90-degree turn to face a different segment of the audience. For such a young age, their stage presence is phenomenal. Climb the stairs to the shoe department and look to the middle of the store. It's hard, yet not difficult, to imagine what it was like that night. The square cutout in the ceiling would have matched the footprint of the boxing ring. In this case, stage, below it. After the show, they were chauffeured off to a celebratory party at the British Embassy not too far from their hotel. The next morning, they boarded the train back to New York City for 2 sold-out performances at Carnegie Hall and another live performance on the Ed Sullivan Show for the second time, and then a pre-recorded show for the 3rd time just a few days later. The tour would continue around the US until the middle of September, in which time they would return home to newfound mega stardom.
All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed putting it together. If you did, please leave it a like and feel free to leave me a comment and hit that subscribe button to see more content like this in the near future. And that train there means it's my time to wrap it up. I'll see you guys in the next video.